Hello, I'm Judy Stiles. Thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers. Well, as you know, Newsmakers looks at stories of local interest. A local news organization is celebrating 120 years of bringing the news to local citizens, the Joplin Globe. Today we're focusing on the Globe and looking back at the 120 years, and joining me from the newspaper is Bill Caldwell. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
This past year, people who subscribed to the Globe had a nice little insert, kind of a brief history of the Globe. Today I'd like to take that a little further, let the viewing public find out about your role in our community in bringing the news to people.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
And I guess questions people like, how did the Globe start? Let's go back to the beginning. How did we start out with a newspaper called the Joplin Globe?
Well, in the beginning, the Joplin Globe was one of several papers in Joplin. We were a multi-newspaper town, and at the time there were two rival newspapers, and there were a group of printers in Joplin who decided that their candidate was not getting the right coverage, and so they wanted, since they were printers, they thought they could start their own newspaper. And these three printers began the Joplin Daily Globe, all in support of William Jennings Bryan, who was
So it was an election year as well.
It was election year, 1896, and the whole issue was free silver, and Jennings Bryan had given his famous speech about Cross of Gold speech, and it excited people, and people were intensely interested that way.
And we have a copy of one of the newspaper, I guess we have some old newspaper front pages, and I think one of the originals that you have, as we go along, we'll be looking at some of these front pages if we can look at some of those. But people are curious, back then the newspapers really took a lot more political stance, as you say, supporting candidates.
Oh yes, they were very partisan. The Joplin Globe was an intensely Democratic paper. The News Herald, which was the combined rival at the time, was an intensely Republican paper, and in their editorial pages they would snipe at one another one way or another if they thought they could catch the one in some kind of fake move of some sort, or call them on the carpet if they thought they had missed the point on something that was really important that their side was all in favor of.
So today we may see these debates that people get upset about. You were having debates through media than the newspapers back then.
Oh, and sometimes they could be pretty vituperative that way. They didn't pull any punches.
So as we're talking and continuing to see some of these newspaper front pages as we go throughout the years, big stories that are, people remember key moments in history, and a lot of times we go back to those newspaper headlines for those images.
Well, it's really important, and it also shows that how the Globe and at that one time it was our rival, later our own paper, the News Herald, they covered national news because we were the media of the day. There was no alternative that way. So if you wanted to find out something that was occurring nationally or internationally, you looked at your newspaper. And so we had all kinds of Associated Press stories of one sort or another, and that's why you could see things about, we had earlier about San Francisco earthquake or the Chicago fire. It's not close to us, but that's the only way you learned about it.
Only way to keep in touch with what else is happening in the world or in our country.
Yes.
And that's hard for people to understand when I think of today of broadcasting and social media and internet. Back then, the newspaper was the way to get your information.
It was really important. In early years, for example, baseball was just the big hot sport of the years in the early part of the 20th century. People just would they'd crowd around the Joplin Globe to find out about the scores for the World Series. And we had it wasn't necessarily electronic, but a scoreboard that used colored lights to show, occasionally they would show play-by-plays, like flashing play-by-play commentary, and then they'd show the scores, and it was affixed to the side of the building on the Virginia Street side. They would close off Virginia Avenue between 4th and 3rd Street, and people would crowd in there, just fill the street, waiting to find out what the latest happening
Looking at the building, trying to read the news.
To read the news about the World Series that way.
And so being able to bring instant information, and you can see as the papers continue to develop here as they go by, the style of the paper, back then a lot of copy. I mean, you didn't have not many pictures.
8 columns that way, and a much larger format of the paper that way too.
So it was a wider piece of paper to be reading and so forth. Photos must have been really, I guess, probably a challenge. Technology, perhaps.
They were a challenge. Instead of film at the time, while they used film or they used glass negatives, they made zinc, I should have brought one, but a little zinc tablet, and it had a dot pattern on it, and the dot pattern had to be inscribed by a person who actually worked out the dot
Fill the
patterns
dots in and make that picture
to
that
make
we're
the
seeing.
pictures. So you had all those, and if you took several of them, it would weigh, a couple pounds to say the least.
Right. So it took a lot of effort to put a paper out.
A lot of effort, and they reused when they set the type, or they used the plates. If they didn't need to save it for a particular reason, they melted it back down and reused it.
So that metal's recycled,
So
basically.
recycled.
And when you're looking at the news of the day, a lot of things to read, your public, your customers who are reading that, obviously you had to have people who are educated readers to be able to comprehend that information.
Oh, yes, that's for sure. And people, as you said earlier, were partisan and had highly developed opinions. On our opinion pages, we had, for several years, say from like the 20s into about 1950, we had one man by the name of Bill Caldwell who was the editorial page editor for the Globe and the Herald both. And he wrote at least 3 editorials for each paper every day.
Wow. So he was a busy person.
He was a busy man. His typewriter was going great guns.
So did the newspapers have large staff back then of reporters as well to try to go out and cover all this news?
Much more staff than we have today, partly because you had to, unless you could phone something in, you had to take notes and come back in and have it transcribed. We were fortunate in some ways because A.H. Rogers, who purchased the paper in 1910, was also the owner of the Southwest Missouri Railroad, which was a streetcar system. And so we maintained offices in the area. And so reporters or couriers could go back from town to town and bring things there. We could deliver papers easily to towns and distribute them that way, the same way. So it was a great give and take system.
And a daily newspaper since the beginning?
Daily newspaper since the beginning. We had occasionally weekly supplements. Occasionally there would be, at one time in the early aughts, we had a Web City edition that was like a 2-page Web City edition. We would have special mining sections. One of the pages I think we saw was the front page of a mining and industrial annual that was, say, a progress edition for the area.
So going beyond just the daily paper to other special presentations and so forth. Well, I know you have with you some actual hard copies, I'll call them, actual newspapers, and just showing us some of what you have for the audience as well, what you chose to bring with you.
Well, I have some things. One of the things that we did, we do lots of coverage of particular, say, day-to-day things, but we occasionally have run things which were focus pieces on individuals. This was about a lady who had a terminal cancer, and we followed along her life. She wanted to document
her
that,
story.
and it was just a very touching piece along that line. We have things we've run back in 9/11. We did an extra paper, which was the first extra we'd had probably since World War II, and people crowded around the building. We passed it out for free, and it was quite a sensation, and it caught people up because still the internet had not quite arrived as yet, and so we were still able to put out an extra that was actually informative and up to the minute.
So people wanted to bring that home and read it and share it with others.
And see what was going on. We have some things, we have special investigation pieces. We did a thing on white supremacists back in 1999 that was coverage on, it was a whole tab.
So that took a lot of work by your reporters to put
A
those
lot of
stories
investigating.
together.
We did an unsolved murder case about the Freeman murder case that is still to this day unsolved, and yet it was something that everyone was interested. We were curious about, and we were able to provide for them.
So
information.
providing information, obviously, continuing to be a key factor for the role of the newspapers.
Provide information that's accurate and that is timely. One of the things that is important, or maybe perhaps unique, about a newspaper is that if there's a factual error, we publish corrections, and that we say this is incorrect, and we strive to be as accurate as possible. One of the reasons why people come to our newspaper is the fact that our reporters have an in-depth background on what's going on. They try to report and give you context of what's happening. We also try to separate what is the factual day-to-day information, ABC 1, 2, 3, from our opinion and editorial pages. And in our opinion pages, we have opinions that are our views, say for the newspaper. We have columnists and op-ed pieces from people who submit them. We have letters to the editor, but they're all listed as opinion, and listed as separate from what happens in the daily news.
So it's a clear difference
A
between
really
the two.
good demarcation, so you have an idea. If you want to form an opinion about something, you can go to the editorial page, and if you want to get your facts, you can read through the rest of the paper, whether it's a sports or whether it's a feature or whether it's general news.
So in a sense, a newspaper serves as the community's archives. If somebody wants to find out, you have a newspaper from the day the tornado hit Joplin or the day after, they can pick that up and see what people were saying at that time.
Exactly, you can see that, and it was a classic. In fact, our photographer whose picture ran on the front page of the New York Times, and it was, the news goes, just has a much farther reach sometimes than we would ever suspect.
So what you're covering in Joplin, you never know how far it's going to go from there.
Yes.
And you have some pictures that kind of show some of the examples too of photos telling stories. Of course, we have a lot of copy, as we said, the early papers, a lot of written material, but throughout the years, pictures have really started capturing some of the stories for people.
Pictures are really important. One of the things, well, for example, we have this remembrance of the victims of the storm, and it's just faces of the storm, just individuals, people that way. We have, I saw just for a moment, we had the images.
Yeah, let's go back to the pictures if we can, that we have some of the pictures on the graphics that show us Joplin in times past.
Yes, Little Mac's Barbecue down at 32nd and Main Street, and people who are there at a meeting after the tornado weren't concerned about, and you see the tornado images of the devastation that way.
Carver Day celebration with
Exactly.
and activities. So showing capturing moments of the community as we go along and looking at this. Bonnie and Clyde, you mentioned earlier,
Yes.
people want to.
And one of the early selfies in the world of Bonnie and Clyde, these images that are so iconic of Bonnie and Clyde were taken from film that was left at the little house there on South Joplin. And the Joplin Globe, the police gave the film to the Globe to publish, or to
develop it. Let's see what's on this roll of
since we
film.
had a photo developing process. So we developed them, printed them, and even today I still get people from researchers, movie people, can we have original copies of that? And those have been long gone.
But you still have the images. I mean, here's
They're
Bonnie
still
and
around.
the same sort of
They're
thing.
in the public domain now.
Right, it's been many years, but those are something that really, when people think of Joplin, they see that, and of course,
Capture it.
Route 66, original
yes,
Route
they're
66.
Near outside of Baxter Springs, part of the original pavement.
So your photographer's helping capture these moments, Marion Days.
Days in Carthage, yes.
And so-
Just realize that our community is diverse, and we have so many different people from around the world who come to Joplin. It's kind of incredible.
So it must be exciting to be able to look through these pictures at the Globe, not only remembering them, but kind of get a sense of feel for the community and the times and things that were happening as we continue to look. You know, people
And
having fun here.
The
at
cardboard boat race, where it's always great fun to see the ingenuity of people and see how long it lasts.
Right, how long is that boat going to stay together for people on Shoal Creek? So a few other photos that we can have to look at as we go along. Once again, people, the moments of remembrance and Carver.
Our
this-
monument. And celebration as well.
Tell me about this one. We have this.
This is from the Griffin Building. When the Griffin Building at 10th and Main was remodeled, one of the things that they had to do was replace these decorative icons, I suppose. And they were found and had to be reproduced, and they've been reinstalled. There you can see
So you're
they're
putting them back in place on the building where they used to be.
And it was quite an accomplishment to be able, first to have found them, and then to repair them and to get some new reproductions made.
So you're capturing that story of bringing that building back to life and what it would have looked like originally. And of course, people like to look at buildings and what they look like originally. I know you have some photos as we go along as well. You know, the people involved. You mentioned some of your
A.H. Rogers, he was our founder, or at least our prominent owner there in 1920.
Getting things really, and of course, people recognize local celebrities,
Yes.
Dennis Weaver and,
Yes, and Anderson's Ice Cream.
Anderson's Ice Cream.
Yes,
So.
that's always important. People recognize that. This was a mural in a little church at First, or A in Schifferdecker, and it was like Christ and the Miners. And the artist escapes me right at the moment who.
But that's a painted mural behind that wedding party. So that,
which was the unique thing for our area, since mining was so important.
right, a big part of the history that we have captured through that mural. So let's go on to another one and see what we have here. The buildings, of course, in the city.
This is the Macy's. Oh, it was Chrisman's first, and then it became Macy's, and then it became Hausman's, and now it's Loft Apartments there. at 5th and Main.
So people can recognize these buildings. And
shopping at the grocery store was different in ages past. You didn't, no self-service. You asked the grocer and he filled your order from the cans or from the cases for you that way.
so we are taking the family to the market, basically, and carrying that through the years.
This was the entrance to the Frisco building for the Frisco station. And that was, people don't think about entering trains from downtown. They usually think of Union Station,
Right.
behind the post office, but the Frisco station also was a railroad station. They had their own lunch counter and newsrooms that way. Was a busy, busy place.
So it was really in the heart of the city and that type of transportation as well as business in that time. So
Exactly.
we move along to some of the other ones. Tell me about her.
Henrietta Cosgrove, I came across her in doing some other research several years ago, and Miss Cosgrove was a widow of a mine owner, an operator in her own right, but she had a desire for social justice in the sense that she decided that it was a bad thing to send children to reform school. Reform school didn't help people, it just made kids into criminals, and that if widows could have pensions so that they could keep track of their children and send them to school, then that would be a good thing. She came up with this idea in about 1909 or 10. She spoke to a conference in Memphis, Tennessee, and the conference, it was somewhat unexpected, and yet it took the conference by storm. She became the first advocate for, at least one major advocate for widows' pensions, mainly because we had so many miners' widows here in the Joplin area, the tri-state district.
So a local issue really spread nationally then.
Nationally,
it became
that way.
national attention.
So she was a mover-shaker in that way.
Tying things together. Let's move on to another picture and see what we have for the presentation with
These were barkeepers at the House of Lords, which was one of our more notorious.
one that people hear about as
watering
being
holes.
Joplin's history, right?
Yes. And a dinner at the House of Lords.
So for people who only have heard about these buildings, they can see what they would have been like through the photographs that you had through the newspaper.
Right.
And John Kennedy coming campaign year this year, big year 1960?
1960, he made an appearance at the Joplin Airport, and it was quite a crowd that way. He was very much, well, on the front page of the paper, it showed him in the crush. He actually went into the crowd to press the flesh, as they say, and he was just swamped by all the people who turned out at the airport.
So capturing moments of national history, tying them into local history as well. Let's move on to the next one and see what we have there. So what of this?
This man is John Malang. If you're from the area, you know perhaps have heard of Malang Road, which is right on the county line next to Kansas state line. But John Malang was a very interesting person in that he was an advocate for concrete roads. He, at the time, gravel road, if you had a gravel road, you were doing good.
More than just dirt.
It was more than dirt. And it was his vision that people needed concrete roads. Concrete roads would help Joplin grow in that his sense. He was someone who, he had this vision, and he spoke in about 1900, 1905 at just a small meeting. And after he spoke and gave his stump speech, like a speech from the heart, this man came up to him and said, "You don't know me, but I think you really do. You know more about this than I do. Here's my card." And his card said Tom Connor, the man for whom Connor Hotel was named after. After that, John Malang was no longer a lead man at a mine. He got a job promoting good roads. He ended up becoming the superintendent for the Joplin Special Road District, and he was one of the first commissioners for the Missouri Highway Department.
So his idea spread across the
His
state.
idea spread apart. We had the first concrete roads in the state, other than outside of Kansas City, St. Louis. And one of the unique things was to show you how things were flexible, let's put it in that way, that he was able to work with the Joplin Special Road District to build concrete roads in Kansas.
So across the state line.
Across the state line. Normally you don't think of that as being an opportunity to help out your neighbor, but he saw it as a way of focusing trade to Joplin and increasing the trade in the community in the tri-state district.
So the roads are good over there, they're going to come over on this side of the state line
Exactly.
as well. Tie them together. So, downtown?
This was downtown. This was an early, I believe it was an Elks parade. And one of the sad things was one of the people in the parade was a man named Peter Schnurr. He had been one of the founders of the Joplin Globe, and he died probably from heat prostration or something.
This is in the middle of summertime.
In the middle of summertime, in the midst of the parade, and these parades marched anywhere between 15 to 20 blocks.
Oh, wow.
You can imagine.
And they're using, you can see the umbrellas probably for shade.
For shade,
because it's a hot
exactly.
day. And of course, in those days, wearing their ties. And
This was the first Joplin High School at 4th and Byers. There now it's just an empty lot.
Right.
And
So-
at one time it was Joplin JUCO.
which
housed there.
eventually led to Missouri Southern. So,
This was the city market at Mount 13th and Main Street. Now I kind of think of it as schoolroom green, and the windows are all boarded up. But at the time, it was quite a plus for local agriculturalists to be able to bring their produce into the city and sell it, and gave a very convenient meeting place for everyone.
so it brought people to town for
To
that
town,
type of presentation. Marketing.
And just mechanics at work. They're looking to see the cars.
So the photographers are capturing on these pictures that we're looking at everyday life as well as historic moments.
Yes. And sometimes the everyday life you realize it was historic in that sense. For example, this one of the concrete being poured for Jung Stadium, and you can see how it was done without what's the right word? The hydraulic pumps.
Right on
lots of
site. There's your
gravity.
pile of gravel, and there's your concrete going right into to making that.
This was the Lowell Dam on Spring River, run by Empire District, and it was a hydroelectric facility, and one of the first are in the area. This was, I believe, from 1910.
1910, so very early
very
on,
early.
showing people the progress, what's happening in the community. So, and then we have an aerial here that ties right into where we're located.
Yes, close to Hart, the farm, Mission Farm here. You can see.
You see the views of what eventually became Missouri Southern State University. If people can, I guess up in the corner you have that Newman and Duquesne Road intersection that
connection.
we have to tying that together. So, and the original mansion that we have
Yes,
on campus.
the mansion house.
Mansion
A
house.
snowy scene.
And then
This was the Olivia Apartments. There at, I believe it's 4th and Pearl or 4th and Byers, and 4th and Pearl, I believe it is. And it was just a classic apartment house, just the best place to be if you
So
wanted
it
to
really
live in
stood out in
Joplin.
the community. If you wanted a nice apartment, that was the place to
A
go.
prestigious place that way. This was the Redings Mill, and you can see how it dominated the scene. Now it's just the shoals there. When the mill burnt down, one of the people who raised the alarm was a Globe carrier, a young boy who was carrying papers and he
saw the
went to
fire and
nearest
said
farmhouse. When it did burn, it was such an intense, it had so much seasoned wood in it that even though it looks like it's a far distance, trees on the opposite side of the creek were burned, scorched.
So that was a major story
it was
for
a
the
major
Globe,
story
that
for the
it was
Globe.
more, it followed up.
And for Redings Mill.
Redings Mill, as far as affecting that community and its
Yes,
future, where it
indeed.
went from there. So. Thomas Hart Benton, we recognize his ties in Joplin.
Right, and he was, in 1905, A.H. Rogers, who we had the pictures of before, had one of his rivals, Gilbert Barbary, was the editor of the Globe. He tried to contend with Mr. Barbie by starting his own paper called the Joplin American, and it didn't last very long, but about the only claim to fame that the Joplin American has for Joplin was that it hired Thomas Hart Benton as a young man to be a staff artist because the cartoons were often used instead of pictures on the front page to illustrate whatever their partisan issue was of the day.
So you'd have special skills for the paper that we don't think about today. Somebody who can draw, somebody who can do those types of things.
The staff artist was a much more important person than just putting ad copy there. You could be on the front page.
And you mentioned cartoons. People might be curious that we looked at those early editions of the paper, all copy, and then later pictures, but the comics section of the paper it grew throughout the years as well.
Oh, it did. We had a variety of comics. Our first regular comic in the Joplin Globe was Mutt and Jeff, and it ran as a daily feature. We had, from about the late teens, we had Bringing Up Father, or sometimes we called it Maggie and Jigs, and that lasted up into the early 80s, and so it was a classic piece of
People
art.
kept reading it.
That way. The News Herald, which when it was our rival, had a full-page Sunday issue called the Bingville News, which was a kind of satirical, gently satirical look at rural life and how country bumpkins lived that way.
So a lot of things. Well, a lot of people are seeing a lot of history as we look at the globe and its history, and I know that you've mentioned, the technology. It's really made an impact throughout the years. Today we can get the paper hard copy, we can get it online, you can get it on your phone.
Exactly.
You're still providing that information.
We still provide information. The venue has changed everything from, we have magazines, and like a new magazine for children. So we have niche publications as such. We have online publications that go for our daily newspaper. We have you can get our regular edition online, complete that way. So it covers a lot of territory. We have probably as many online readers as we have subscribers, so that is an important reach.
Showing the trend, how the development is changing.
You still get your news from us.
And you've been involved with helping preserve the past for the globe. What do you enjoy the most about doing this?
Oh, well, perhaps it's doing the research, partly because people have questions and perhaps things I have never thought of or even suspect it might be in this area. For example, I have this column that I run on Sundays. The very second week, I had a man send me in an email asking did I know if there was a Tucker car dealership? And yet, it turns out we had a Tucker car dealership in Joplin. And that stirred a whole line of research. Very curious to me, lots of really cool ideas.
A lot of things you can learn from the past by looking at the newspaper
Oh, that's for sure.
and sharing with the community. And you continue to share those stories through your column in the paper, tying that together.
It's a lot of fun that way. And you are always surprised at whether it's the reach or people's reactions. Or I had an article about a man who was a Congressional Medal of Honor winner from Neosho, and I thought that was a nice story, cool. About 3 weeks later, I get a call from a man in Wichita saying he was a nephew of this person, a great nephew, and thank you. I thought that was cool, and it was about a month later than that, I got an email from a man in Montana who said, I'm his grandson.
So the family kept finding out and spreading the news.
The news kept spreading, and I was the one who was really surprised.
That's great. Well, Bill, I'd like to thank you very much for visiting with us today and sharing some moments from the Globe and your role at the Globe. Thank you for being here today.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I'd like to thank you for joining us this week for Newsmakers. I'm Judy Stiles. I'll see you again next week at the same time.